Before Egypt rose from the sands, the world had already witnessed the birth of cities, the clash of kings, and rivers that carved the fate of humanity. But along the Nile, a new story was about to begin, one of gods, pharaohs, and pyramids reaching for the sky. Are you ready to step into the land where history itself was rewritten? In the distant past, in the heart of endless deserts, there was a magical line, the Nile. It flowed like the blue lifeblood of the land. Each year, it rose and spilled, covering the earth, and when the waters withdrew, dark, fertile soil remained. People first feared this mighty river, but soon they learned it was no enemy. Villages rose along its banks, tribes joined together, and life took root. The sun cast its golden rays over the waters as if blessing them each morning. From this gift, fields grew, temples were built, and stones were laid one upon another. Without knowing, people began history itself. Egypt was born, and still the Nile flowed, whispering to the future, "Without me, you would not exist." And so, from the fertile gift of the Nile, people dared to dream higher. Villages turned into towns, and towns into something greater, a kingdom of stone and sun. They looked to the sky and thought, if we can tame the river, why not reach for eternity? Pharaohs rose, seen not as men, but as living gods. Their voices commanded thousands, their visions carved into the earth itself. And from the sweat of countless hands, giants of stone began to climb toward the heavens. Blocks heavier than mountains stacked with impossible precision. Under the blazing sun, the desert echoed with the sound of chisels, ropes, and human breath. And there, against the endless horizon, pyramids rose, triangles of eternity. They were not just tombs, but stairways to the afterlife, messages written in stone to defy time itself. The people looked upon them with awe. "Our pharaoh will never die," they whispered, "for his soul will rise with the sun, and his body will rest within these sacred giants." And so, in the Old Kingdom, Egypt crowned itself with monuments that mocked death and silence. The pyramids stood like guardians of forever, their shadows stretching across the desert, whispering, "We were built not for years, but for eternity." But eternity is heavy, and even the strongest stone can cast a shadow on those who built it. The pyramids had risen like mountains, yet beneath their glory, cracks began to form. Pharaohs demanded more, always more. More stone, more labor, more life poured into monuments for the dead. The people, once filled with awe, began to feel the weight of silence in their bellies. Hunger crept into villages, and whispers of doubt floated like dust across the desert. The gods' king seemed distant now, sealed inside their tombs of gold and stone. Without unity, Egypt trembled. Kings grew weak, thrones passed like drifting sand, and the great order that once bound the Nile together unraveled. Temples stood half-built, palaces abandoned, the once bright crown of Egypt slipping into chaos. The Nile still rose, still gifted its black soil, but men no longer rose with it. Brother turned against brother, city against city. And where once eternal pyramids had reached for the heavens, now only echoes of power lingered in the broken air. This was the first intermediate period, a time when even God seemed silent, and the desert swallowed the voice of kings. But even the strongest kingdoms can feel the tremor of shadows at their edges. From beyond the deserts came the Hyksos, riding foreign horses and bearing strange bronze weapons that sang with death. They swept through cities like sandstorms, leaving fear and smoke in their wake. The people of Egypt watched their walls tremble. The Middle Kingdom's harmony fractured under the weight of these invaders. Yet, in the face of chaos, a spark of resistance ignited. Local leaders and brave warriors rallied, hiding in the Nile's reeds, striking like vipers from the shadows. Temples echoed with secret prayers, and secret messages were carved into stone, carrying hope through the fear. Egyptians learned to adapt, to wield bronze and bow with cunning, and slowly, the invaders' grip loosened as courage grew like reeds along the riverbank. From the struggle rose legends whispered for generations, of heroes who struck from the night, of cities that refused to bow, and of a civilization that would not vanish, even when the desert seemed to consume it all. The second intermediate period was a time of shadow and fire, but Egypt, patient as the Nile, waited for its return to light. From the shadows of invasion, a new dawn broke with fire and fury. The Hyksos had taken the crown, but Egypt was not a land to surrender quietly. Whispers of rebellion rippled through villages, growing into a roaring river of defiance. Pharaohs rose again, fierce and cunning, leading armies that thundered like storms across the desert. Horses galloped, bronze clashed, and arrows flew like silver lightning under the scorching sun. The Nile itself seemed to pulse with their anger, carrying the hopes of a people determined to reclaim their homeland. Cities were retaken one by one, walls scarred but standing, as the Egyptians learned to wield the invaders' own tools against them. Secrets of strategy and courage passed from elder to youth, turning fear into the sharpened edge of revenge. And when the last Hyksos fled, Egypt's heart beat stronger than ever. The Second Intermediate Period ended, leaving behind tales of cunning, courage, and fire, a testament that even when shadows fall, the river of destiny cannot be stopped. Victory was not enough for Egypt. The river called for more: grander dreams, taller monuments, and a kingdom that would echo through eternity. From the ashes of battle rose the new kingdom, where pharaohs became legends and their names burned across the sands like wildfire. In the streets, scribes recorded victories in ink black as night, while artisans painted gods and monsters across golden walls, turning every hall into a story, every corridor into a battlefield frozen in time. And above it all, the pharaohs rode in chariots of flame and bronze, their eyes set on lands far beyond the horizon, their hearts beating with empire. Egypt had become more than a kingdom. It was a pulse, a storm, a living legend. The new kingdom was born, fierce and unstoppable, its shadow stretching across the world, whispering, "We are eternal, and we will not be forgotten." Amid the thunder of empires and the clash of bronze, Egypt's soul whispered in incense and shadow. The gods watched from towering statues, their eyes carved from stone, unblinking, eternal. Temples rose like mountains of devotion, their walls alive with painted tales of creation, chaos, and kings who walked with the divine. Priests chanted, calling to Ra, Osiris, and Isis, while the people offered bread, grain, and bloodless sacrifice, hoping the gods would tip the scales of fate in their favor. Death was no longer an end, but a journey, a gilded path lit by the stars. Tombs were mapped like maps of the heavens, and mummies wrapped in linen whispered secrets of eternity. Every festival, every ritual, every song echoed through courtyards and across the Nile, binding the living to the dead and the mortal to the divine. Children listened wide-eyed as elders spoke of underworlds where gods judged hearts, and of pharaohs who became stars, riding the sun across the endless sky. In this world, faith was armor, temples were battlegrounds of spirit, and the afterlife waited like a promise. Egypt was more than stone and sand. It was a living tapestry of gods, men, and the eternal Nile, each thread pulsing with magic, mystery, and the heartbeat of a civilization that would never forget its own soul. But even legends fade, and the Nile, patient as ever, watched empires waver. The new kingdom's golden sun dimmed. Pharaohs grew old, their voices cracking, their shadows shrinking. Borders trembled under foreign feet, and cities that once sang with life now whispered with fear. Mercenaries and rebels carved paths through lands that had known unity, and once mighty temples stood half empty, their walls echoing with memories instead of chants. Wealth piled high in tombs, yet power slipped through grasping hands like water through fingers. The people, weary of endless wars and changing rulers, began to question the old songs, the old promises. The gods seemed distant, their statues silent, as if Egypt itself held its breath, waiting for a spark that might never come. And so the late period unfolded, a kingdom of shadows and whispers, of crumbling glory and fractured hearts. The Nile still flowed, but even it could not hide the tremors of decline. Egypt, once a roaring symphony, now hummed a quieter, fragile tune, each note a reminder that even the mightiest fall, eventually. Then came a man from the west, a king with eyes like fire and ambition that burned brighter than the Egyptian sun. Alexander, they whispered, had crossed deserts and rivers, conquering lands with a speed that made even the Nile seem slow. Egypt shivered under the shadow of foreign boots, yet the people watched with awe, for change rode upon the winds. The old gods did not vanish, but new faces appeared. Greek eyes, Greek tongues, Greek names etched alongside hieroglyphs in temples now shared between worlds. Alexandria rose like a jewel on the delta, its library swelling with the knowledge of two civilizations entwined. Scholars and scribes, priests and merchants, all danced in the currents of this new age, where the past and the present collided in golden markets and marble halls. Pharaohs became patrons. Statues took on new features, and the river carried ships heavy with papyrus, scrolls, and stories from lands that once seemed unreachable. Egypt was no longer merely itself. It had become a bridge, a meeting place of myths, men, and ideas that stretched across the seas. The land whispered that even under foreign kings, the Nile would endure, cradling both the old magic and the new dreams, and that Egypt's story was far from finished. It was only rewriting itself beneath the shadow of Alexander and the Ptolemies. But even the grandest bridges of culture could not hold against the tide of empires. Rome came, vast and relentless, its legions marching like shadows across the sands. Alexandria, once a jewel of two worlds, now bowed beneath the eagle of Rome, and the Nile carried not just water, but the weight of conquest. Pharaohs were no more. Kings became governors under foreign law, and temples whispered their prayers into ears that barely listened. The streets hummed with new voices, Latin mixing with ancient Egyptian chants, and markets overflowed with treasures that would soon sail across the Mediterranean. Yet the river endured, patient and eternal. It carved through cities, past temples and tombs, bearing witness to the final chapter of a civilization that had risen from reeds, carved pyramids into the sky, fought shadows and invaders, and danced with gods. Egypt had fallen to Rome, but it did not vanish. It lived in stone, in scrolls, in the pulse of the Nile itself, a story echoing through eternity. And so, as the sun set over the delta, the land whispered its truth. Empires may conquer, kings may fall, but Egypt, the heart of the Nile, would forever flow, eternal, untamed, and unforgettable.